for this webinar. Before we start this webinar, I'd like to let you know of the following. This webinar will be recorded, and you can access the recording on the IVPN network website, which I will share shortly in the chat box. We also encourage you to become part of the IVPN network by joining any of our listserv via the IVPN network website. As IVPN student, one of our goals is to cultivate future pharmacists of exceptional caliber by providing them with a range of professional development opportunities, for example, like this one. These experiences are designed to prepare them adequately for the dynamic and competitive pharmaceutical industry. I will introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Gareth. Dr. Gareth is a prolific scientific author who has published more than 320 articles in peer-reviewed journals over the last 25 years, including in Nature, Science, Proceedings of the National Academy USA, and other high-profile outlets. His research has been widely covered in the media, and he is often invited to present talks and lead workshops around the world, most recently in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, China, Colombia, Spain, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. In-person workshops in China, run by Dr. Gareth in 2019, were attended by more than 5,000 colleagues. He has conducted thousands of online trainings, including for Springer Nature, Research Squared, Aaron's Top Edit, and the Charles Worth Group, as well as for numerous universities globally. Over to you, Dr. Gareth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the chance to do this, and thank you for the introduction. It's great to be back. Welcome everybody to our event today. I hope that you are doing well wherever you're joining us from for this event today. You're all very welcome. And as Mohammed said, we will be making the video of this event available to everybody on the IVPN website after the event is over today. I understand that there'll also be lots of time as we get towards the end of our session today for questions and feedback. So don't be shy. If you've got questions, if you've got feedback, put them into the chat box, put them into the webinar Q&A, and we'll get to those a little bit later on in our event. So welcome back. This is the third, in our series of webinars for this series for IVPN. And today we're going to be talking about writing your manuscript, the art of scientific storytelling. And you may remember this graphic from our last event, the academic publishing cycle, or as I like to call it, the academic hamster wheel, because researchers, pharmacists, people, everybody working on research going round and around and around this academic wheel all of the time. So you may have an idea, you may be searching for funding, you may be collecting data, looking for journals. We talked about that last time in our publication planning session. Today, we're going to talk about article writing, submission, peer review, and publication. And the cycle continues. The academic publishing wheel of fortune goes on and round and round and round. So you may very well be thinking, I've got papers at different stages of this cycle. I've got work at different points. And as we talked about last time, making sure that your excellent research stands out from everybody else's is one of the key pieces, one of the key elements of being a successful researcher. Publication planning, journal selection, making sure that your work is readable, citable, and makes an impact. You want to make sure that your work stands out from all of the other 2 million academic papers published every year, 30,000 articles published in just the medical and health sciences every month. So we're here, IVPN Student, to help you gain the skills that you need to be an effective writing and publishing researcher in order to get funding, in order to get promoted potentially, in order to get your master's, your PhD, of course, or just simply to promote and develop research and development. And as we talked about in our last session together last week, Your motivations for writing and publishing academic papers are quite different to the motivations of editors and peer reviewers. You want to get funded. You want to get papers published to get your master's or your PhD, but editors and peer reviewers at those journals are looking at things from a different perspective. So our starting point as effective academic writers, putting our manuscripts together, is initially to think inside the mind of editors and peer reviewers. When you make a submission to an international journal, your paper goes through what we call the triage process. It's a bit like going out in the street and getting run over by a bus. You get rushed to the hospital. The doctors at the hospital decide what's going to happen to you next. And it's the same with academic articles. Does the paper fit with the journal's scope? Does the article have a clear message? Is it original? Is it important? Is it true? And is it relevant to the readers of that journal? All of these issues are things that editors consider when they receive manuscripts for initial submission. The desk editorial process, the desk triage, the editorial triage process. So we need to keep that in mind when writing academic articles. We have to sell our work to get it through this initial stage, because of course, the higher the impact factor at the journal that you're targeting, the higher the initial rejection rate. Big journals, your Natures, your Sciences, they've got high rejection rates. They push back about 9 out of 10 initially submitted articles. So you need to be sure that your work has the best possible chance of acceptance. And that, again, is what we are here to do. We are here to help with this process. In the publication planning stage, as we discussed last time, there really are 3 things to have in mind before you begin the writing and publishing process. 3 things to think about before you begin to write. Your message. We talked about this in our last session. How are you going to explain the take-home message of your research article, of your research paper, to somebody like my granny or like the bus driver who does not have a clear understanding of what you worked on? Developing a simple and easy to understand message for your academic research that's broadly appealing, that will be attractive to journal editors and peer reviewers, that will be broadly understandable to lots of researchers. That, by the way, is how you get papers into those higher impact factor journals, by broadening the message of your research. Is very, very important. Your message is the first thing to think about when putting your article together, because if editors, peer reviewers, people like me who manage the submission flow at international journals cannot work out your take-home message, what's important, what's interesting, what the readers at the journal should be getting out of your research when they look at it in the journal, they are going to reject your paper before sending it for peer review. They'll also reject your paper, by the way, if you haven't been able to convince them that the work is important. Editors think, if I'm interested in this research, my readers will be too. And this, by the way, is often missed by authors, by researchers. As we talked about last time, researchers write papers for themselves. They think about their own research field. They think about their own research team. They don't broaden the message. They don't think about impact, socioeconomic, as well as academic impact, as we also talked about last time, to make sure that their work is interesting to the journal readership. So before you begin to write, we'll talk about writing in a moment in this session today, have a think about preparing yourself to write, the original nature of your results. What's the story? What's the take-home message? Is my research new and interesting? And if so, why? How does my work relate to a currently hot topic? Very important. What's new and challenging about my research Do I provide a solution to a difficult problem? It's all in the story as you start to assemble your work for international journal submission. You have to have a clear and effective message with your paper. It's the first stage in preparing to write. The second thing to know, the second stage of the process, as we discussed in our last session last week, is journal selection. What's the audience? Who are the audience for your research? Aiming high, choosing appropriately, and learning to sell and manage your article submission to an effective, well-selected journal is also very important. So, message, number one, your audience, number two, your journal, and then, of course, the structure, which we'll come to in a moment, of the writing itself. Preparing to write, your topic, your audience, your purpose, gathering all those supporting details, all of that supporting information before you begin the writing process. Message, audience, and structure, as you can see here, and as we'll talk about in more detail in this webinar presentation today, these are the three things to have in mind before you start to hammer out the words on your computer keyboard, before you start to write your next paper. What's the take-home message? Who are the audience for this piece of writing? Which journal will you be selecting? If you have some questions about that, then maybe have a listen back to our presentation from last weekend where we talked in more detail about journal selection, the different kinds of journals, which one would be best for your research, and then of course, structure, the structure of your writing, because readers need to know, just like when I read a detective story or watch a movie, I need to know when I'm reading an academic article where I've come from, where I am now, and where the paper is going in the future. A plot is needed. An academic paper is just like a story. It's got to have a structure to keep your readers engaged. If you want people to stay with your paper, to read it all the way through to the end, to get that takeaway from the article, you need to have a clear structure. Where does that structure come from? It comes from the target journal. Each journal is different. Each kind of paper that you would write would be potentially quite different. So your message, your target journal, your audience, and the structure of the writing are very important to have in mind before you get going. So we are talking then, of course, in our presentation today about good old English. And we'll come back to this now. We'll be talking now about tricks and tips for English academic writing. But so far, we have discussed the initial stage of the article submission process, editorial triage, like when you get hit by a bus and get rushed off to the hospital, and those three things to know about before you begin the writing process: your message, your audience, and your structure. So let's have a little bit of a look at English academic writing. And this is important for everybody, especially though if English is not your native language, because of course we all get letters like this all the time from journals. Dear sir, dear madam, many thanks for asking whether we would like to publish your paper. It's good and original, but we are simply not willing to publish it. The trouble is that the good bits were not original and the original bits were not good. Very, 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 very often, academic article submissions to journals get rejected because of issues with English. Here's a quick list. Some of the main reasons why journal articles get rejected by international publishers. They often, of course, as we all know, as writing and publishing academics, they reject our excellent research. Why is that? These common problems topped a recent survey of journal editors' submissions outside of the journal's scope. Plagiarism. I know you're not going to do that, of course. Incorrect formatting, becoming less and less of an issue as more and more journals around the world move towards a free formatting submission process where you can put your paper in any style you like, so long as it's consistent. We worry about the formatting later. Elsevier have that your paper, your way submission workflow, for example. Poor English writing, big issue, as well as reviewer responses and recycled submissions. I'm sure you've been in this particular boat in your career, perhaps already, a paper coming back from a journal submission because the English was considered not effective enough for the journal. And of course, writing in English, we know that our English must be effective, because if it's not, we make communication errors. Just a few funny examples I collected from around the internet, but it is important, of course, that your academic research message is not buried in language issues. And that's why we're here to help. We're here to give you some tips, some tricks, some suggestions for being effective in your English, in your written English in academic articles, before we talk about the structure of papers in a little bit more detail. But English, of course, it's the universal language of scientific communication. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your particular perspective, academic papers need to be well written, often to a higher standard of English than we might see in other writing. And of course, the writing process, as I'm here to try to convince you today, can be beneficial to your own academic work. Of course, it should be, it can be an intellectual activity in its own right, being effective in English written communication. So I give you three of my heroes in English academic writing, talk about a little bit more in a moment. But good old Winston Churchill, he was said by John F. Kennedy, the American president, that he could mobilize the English language and send it into battle. He inspired people by the way that he spoke and by the way that he wrote. Two other English journalists here on the slide. Hadley Freeman is a journalist. I attended a number of writing courses with her, thinking in English, writing as you think, writing in the way that you think. The best way to write is exactly the way that you think, she taught me. And we'll come back to that in a moment. And this guy at the bottom of the slide, sadly not with us anymore. He's a food writer. He was unable to write, so dyslexic that everything he published, he dictated into a microphone. He recorded his speech and then transcribed from his voice. So the point is that you don't actually need to be able to write to be a fantastic English writer. And I think we'll all take a little bit of inspiration from these guys in a moment. But when you have to put a paper together, when it comes time to start thinking about writing an academic article in English, how do you feel about that? How do you start writing? Do you carefully construct a plan beforehand, because you should, or do you just jump in without a plan? What kind of writer are you? Because if English is not your native language, then you should be like Arnold here in the middle of the slide. You need a plan beforehand. You need a structure. You definitely need to think about what goes where, which bits of writing go in which particular places. In your paper, you need a plan, you need a structure before you start to write. And we, of course, can learn a lot from those who've come before us. One of the best pieces of advice I have for anybody looking to put an academic paper together is find other examples of similar published work that does the same kind of thing that you would like your paper to do, maybe on the same topic, maybe on the same group of drugs, maybe on the same sample population, and copy the style, copy the structure, copy the way that a successful academic article has been put together. Don't copy the words, that would be plagiarism, but see how it's done. See how a successful English paper written by a leader, perhaps an internationally recognized researcher in your particular field, puts the article together. And that can be very, very, very beneficial as you build out the structure of your own work. And thinking about writing in English is very important. Try to think in English. As Hadley Freeman would say, you then write as you think. Don't translate in your head. Don't write in your native language and then translate into English if you can. Try to think and write in English, even if that's a little bit every day. We always recommend a few minutes, a little bit, writing little and often in your own subject area in English if you can. And as I already mentioned a moment ago, work with papers that you like and respect, that are highly cited in your own research area for style, for shape, for structure, and for presentation, because this will get you ahead. This is great advice, finding other papers published in your research area that do the same kind of thing that you would like your article to do. That's very important as you think and you write in English. So plain English, simple, effective academic English in your writing. This is very important because most of your readers, don't forget that we're putting our papers together with our readers in mind. We've always got those academic readers, those editors, those peer reviewers, people who are going to use our papers in the future in mind. 6 features of good, plain academic English. Short sentences, no unnecessary words, familiar words, active rather than passive voice in our writing, of course, clear style and good punctuation. We've got lots more content on this, lots of other specific training courses. We're also very happy to work with you directly if you would like to give us examples of your work, and we can work on the English in partnership with you. So short sentences, no unnecessary words, familiar words, active versus rather than passive voice in your writing, a clear style and good punctuation are key pieces of advice for effective English communication. So far we've talked about preparing to write, your message, audience, and structure. We talked before that as well about what happens when you make submissions to journals, how you can stand out from the crowd, journal selection, and surviving that journal internet, that academic triage process where you go into the submission system. We then talked just briefly in our presentation today about writing, English writing tips. And of course, lots more where that came from. If you get in touch with me, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to provide you with other content and other videos specifically on English writing. But let's have a look now in the third part of our training session today about article structure, as we dive in and have a look at some tips and tricks for writing the different sections of an effective academic article, because structure, as we've talked about, is the most crucial element of an academic article. If you forget everything else that I shout and scream about in this webinar today, please try to remember the 3 things that you should have in mind before you begin to write: your message, your audience, and structure, which comes from your target journal. It comes from the paper that you're trying to put your article together to publish in. Readers need to know where they've come from, where they are now, and where they're going. As we've talked already in this session today, a plot is needed. A paper is like a story. And of course, we are very familiar as researchers with the general structure, the overall shape of an effective academic paper. The title and the abstract, as we discussed in our first session, and then the main text, the IMRAD, the main body text of the article. And don't forget that your title and your abstract really does perform a separate function in the publishing process to the rest of the paper, because an effective title and an effective abstract is what makes your paper discoverable. It leads to impact. It means that other researchers will be able to find, they will be able to cite, and they will be able to use your research. So let's have a quick look at these different sections, few tips and tricks for writing the different bits, beginning with the title. A good article title, an effective article title, should contain the fewest possible words to adequately describe the contents of your study. Keep it short. As we talked about last time, did you know that article titles less than 7 words in length actually get more citations? And that's particularly true in the health and medical sciences. So keep it short. Identify the main issue of the study, the subject, be accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete with your title writing, and no infrequently used abbreviations that nobody outside of your subject area is going to have any idea what they mean. You need lots of people to want to read and engage with your work. So it's important to be concise. Entice the reader. Get them interested in the topic of your study without giving away the punchline. A non-declarative article title is best in health sciences, in pharmacology, in your subject area. You do not want people to learn the takeaway of the study from the paper title. They may then go off and start prescribing the drug. If you call your article, "This drug, a cure for cancer," that's called a declarative title, and it's usually not preferred by medical journals. They want something that we call non-declarative. They want something more descriptive. A new drug has an impact on cancer. People are then going to want to read the study more. So entice the reader without giving away the punchline. Don't be over sensational. And of course, as you may know from your own subject area, some journals insist on including information on study design in the title. So have a think about what readers want to know. When putting a title together, often it's important to include 3 key factors: the variable, the outcome, and the sample. So if you write these down for your own study, for your own subject, your area of study, you can then use this technique to put together a more effective title. So what's the variable? What's the outcome that your study addresses? And what's the sample that you're looking at? This is important as you structure an effective title for your next academic paper. And of course, you'll be working with colleagues. You'll be editing. You'll be fighting. You'll be discussing. You'll be massaging. You'll be bringing the work back around, and you will spend time to find a good, effective title. It takes time. It takes work. It takes editing. So don't do it in a rush at the very last moment. Do put the time and energy in with your colleagues to find an effective title for your next paper, because this is the window on your research. It's the way into your study for other academics. This title takes time. This is an example from my own work. You massage it, you edit it, you work with it, you bounce it back and forth between you and your co-authors until you have something that you are happy with, that gets across an enticing, alluring, attractive message for readers to be hooked into the study while keeping it short, a title. And of course, lots more. We've got lots of information, but as I said before, if you'd like to send us information about your study, we would be happy to work with you to come up with effective components for your study. In the abstract then, this 200 or 250 word segment of text that goes at the top of your study, you should always be imagining that this is all a reader will see. This is all a reader is going to get to read about your study. Think you're writing a conference abstract. Imagine always that the abstract is all that a reader is going to engage with. It's got to be honest and precise. It's got to stand alone. No technical jargon, short and specific, and no references. Keep in mind that the quality of your abstract will inform your editor's decision. Why is that? Well, probably it's all they're going to read with the title, the cover letter, before making a decision about whether to send your article out for peer review. Many journals base their decisions on the abstract alone. And sadly, of course, many authors write this in a big rush, almost as an afterthought. This has to be worked on carefully. A concise, standalone piece of writing with a very clear message that accurately reflects the full text of the study. And you may remember from our previous presentation, the 4-question-based technique, the trick for writing an effective abstract. You write down these 4 questions and then you answer them with information relevant to your research. Why did you do the study? Answer that. What did you do? Answer that. What did you find? You answer that. And what did you conclude? And you answer that. That's the structure of an abstract. Why did you do it? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? In sequence, the structure's got to happen in that order so that readers know where they are. Very important technique. Give it a go. I guarantee you will end up with 100, maybe 150 words that you can put together as the structure, as the core of your next abstract. But many journals, as you know, are asking for structured abstracts anyway. Here we have an example: background, methodology, principal findings, conclusions, and significance. Often journals ask for these broken down, but if your journal is not asking for an open structured abstract, we recommend that you do it anyway. Using the 4-question based technique, you can always take the structure out and put a block of text together. It's got that shape anyway, but having a look at structured abstracts in your field can really help you organize your ideas when you put your study together. Because if you look at a paper published in your field in a high impact factor journal, a paper that is often read and often cited by you potentially, you can go in with a colored pencil, a colored marker, and mark off those different sections. You will be able to find the answers to my 4 questions in sequence in a well-written abstract. Give it a go. If you don't believe me, go and have a look at a paper that you recently looked at that is highly cited in your field. You'll find the answers to my 4 questions in sequence in that abstract. They have to be there to keep the reader engaged and to give the reader all of the information that they need to know about the study so that they don't have to read the rest of the paper. And there's quite a lot of text on these slides, I know that, but don't worry, happy to give you a slide file at the end of our presentation as well. Maybe some of these examples will help you as you build out your own abstract for your next study. Here's one from some of my own work. But keep in mind, when putting an abstract together, your readers are key. Most of them don't have time to read everything published in their field. They read abstracts every day to stay up to date on research in their field. And your abstract is often the only thing that your peers are going to read about your study. If you don't believe me, ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time I read all the way through an academic paper? When was the last time I read more than just the abstract and the title? Most of the time, it's all you read. So keep your readers in mind when putting together an effective abstract. Why does the study need to be done? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? How do you advance the field? Have a look at this template. It's the 4-question based structure for effective abstract writing. Why? What did you do? What did you find? And how have you advanced the field? What did you conclude? Structure is everything in academic writing. Readers, as we've talked about before, need to know throughout the paper where they've come from, where they are now, where they are going. A plot is always needed. Have a look at papers published in your field that you like and respect, that have been highly cited by other researchers, to give yourself that template for your next article. Quickly then, in the time that we have remaining in our session together today, let's have a look at some tips and tricks for writing the introduction, the methods, the results, and discussion section of an effective academic paper. And don't forget that this part of the study, the IMRAD section of the academic article, needs to be balanced. Average length of an academic paper published in the international literature is about 5,000 or 6,000 words. So in your introduction, you don't want to write 10,000 words, 20,000 words. You're going to have to keep it short and concise. Grab the reader, bring them immediately to the crucial issue that your paper addresses. Keep it short. A great template for a brilliant introduction section is 2 or 3 paragraphs. I know. If you think about the overall length of an academic paper, you're probably only going to be writing about 1,500 words or 2,000 words for your introduction. And we do not want to see a literature review. Set the scene, a few important review papers, a few state-of-the-art studies related to the question that your paper addresses. Give the state-of-the-art in the introduction rather than describing everything that's ever been done on the topic. We do not want a literature review. Grab the reader, keep it short, and avoid a literature review with an opening sentence that takes the reader straight to the issue, containing the most important details of the issue, a brief summary of the controversies and best evidence, keeping within the rules of good writing, written in the active voice rather than the passive voice, and ending your introduction with a crisp and clear research question that sets the scene. We're going to have a look at the shape of academic papers in a moment, but in an introduction, you start broad. Why is the research interesting? And then build it down towards a question at the end of the introduction that bridges between this section and the methods, where you say what you're going to do. If you look at papers published in Nature and Science, for example, many journals, you see a bridging sentence at the end of the introduction. Here we show, or in this study, we show, that takes the reader from the question presented in the introduction into the next section, into the methods section. So here's a template. Start off your introduction by stating the question. Then, in the second section, give the reader what we call the state of the art, information they need to have about recent studies, review papers. Where are we in the field? What stage are we at? Not a literature review, but what's the state of the field, the state of the art related to the question that this paper seeks to address. And then this study shows, bridging between your 1,500 words, 2,000 words introduction into your methods section, which, by the way, everybody always thinks is boring. They often say to me, writing the methods section, it's really boring. But no, this is the best bit. This is the section of academic writing where you get to take your readers on a journey, take them through the different bits of your study. And it fits, by the way, into a timeline sequence. You will write down a series of sections, a series of subheadings for your method section that correspond to what you did in the study in sequence, in your lab book, what you did first, what you did second, what you did third, what you did fourth, and what you did last. Data collection before data analysis. It's a narrative, a timeline of what happened in the study, and you need to make sure that you put enough information into this section so that somebody else can repeat the work. Many papers get rejected because of incomplete information in the methods section. So do show this to other researchers in your department. Ask them, have I put enough information into this section for somebody else to be able to repeat the work? Give enough detail. If your method section is thin on details, editors are going to worry that you're hiding something. What statistical methods did you use to analyze your data? Take advice. Show your method section to other researchers. Show it to other people. Make sure you have enough information in here so that somebody else, a qualified researcher, can repeat your study. And the sections of a method follow the timeline of the study. Data collection followed by data analyses. That's why statistics analyses are almost always the last section of a method section, because you've got to collect the data before you analyze the data. And then, of course, your results will have almost the same shape as your method section. I recommend that you put your results section together first, actually, before putting together any other parts of your study. You often make figures, you often make tables as part of your analyses, and those figures and tables form the core of your results section. Here you present the results of the study in figures. By the way, often the shape is the same as the shape of the methods section, data being collected in sequence, data being analyzed in sequence. Knowing what to include or exclude is a trick which comes from experience, but base it around your figures. Follow the shape of the method section and keep in mind that a picture is always worth 1,000 words. It's often much better to show an illustration than write about that illustration. Ordering your results around primary and secondary outcomes in the same order as listed in the method section, stating clearly and simply what you found, and don't duplicate information from text and tables. You are not talking about an interpretation here. You are providing the facts in the results section, often in the same sequence as was already presented in the method. So, introduction, methods and results. These are very specific. As you'll see in a moment, they form the central core of the shape of an effective academic paper. Now in your discussion, you're going to expand out from what you found and talk about why your results are important and why your results are significant. So, imagine your discussion section. Here you begin by telling the reader what the answer is to the question that your study addresses, why your results are different from what other workers have found. Interpret your results in light of other published information and relate your discussion back to the objectives and questions you raised in the introduction. Your paper is answering a question. It's testing a hypothesis. And so at the beginning of the discussion, let's answer that question. Let's answer that hypothesis. Let's tell the readers what the outcome of the study is, and then let's interpret that and get broader and talk about why this is so important in a bigger context. And that's why it's important to have a look at what we talked about in our last session about impact. Why is your work important in a big picture, beyond academic impact, socioeconomic impact, and so on of your work? And limit your conclusions to what your data can actually support. Suggest future directions for research, new methods and explanations or deviations from previously published results. You want to suggest future directions for research in your discussion so that other people can't read your discussion and think of new directions themselves. If you think of something that you're going to work on next, write about it in your discussion. That forces other people to cite your study. So we don't want an expansive essay that extrapolates wildly from what was found. Start your discussion with a single sentence that states your main findings. What's the answer to the question? And don't forget to discuss your strengths as well as your weaknesses in your discussion. This also helps with the peer review process, because if you're open and honest about what your paper cannot do, its limitations, in your writing, that means that a peer reviewer can't point those things out as criticisms in their review. So relate your study to what's already been found. How do your results fit with what's already known? What are the strengths and weaknesses of your study compared to others? How and why does your paper offer a different conclusion? What does your study mean? Don't overstate the importance. And what does your research not address? And by the way, a tip for finishing your paper: do not finish with the cliche, more research is needed. We see that all the time at the end of papers. It's a useless phrase because obviously more research will be needed. Quite often people write that at the end of the paper, but you don't need to. Rank your conclusions from your study in sequence, from most to least important, and then do that section in reverse. Rank and finish your study with the most important conclusion at the end. It's like running a race. Finish strong, put the most important conclusion into the final sentence of your study. And you can use the same structure broadly as you saw already in the methods and in the results. And again, if you need help, if you find this confusing or you'd like more information specific to your own subject area, then do get in touch. We're here to help. We're ready to help you with your own particular writing and article structuring issues, because the shape of an academic paper looks like this. Why did you do the study? What did you do? The methods. What did you find? The results, and what it all means. So you can logically link your ideas throughout your paper, the general background, current state of the field, problems in the field, the objectives, the methodology, the results and figures, a summary of your findings, the relevance of your findings, and then the implications for the field. This is a great structure to have in mind when putting an article together. And of course, I would say in conclusion that you will get published if you pick an important research question. You will get published if you use the right method to answer that question, but you've got to write a short, clear, effective, well-structured account of your study that follows a clear structure which comes from your target journal and that uses effective English writing to convey your message clearly. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Gareth. This has been another presentation in our series of training events with the IVPN Student Network. And don't forget that, as Winston Churchill is famous for saying, success consists of going from failure to failure without losing any of your enthusiasm. So do keep that in mind as well. We work with Bentham Science Publishers. Do have a look at Bentham Science Publishers, some fantastic pharmacy, pharmacology, neuropharmacology journals. You can follow us on these various social media channels. And with that, I will pass the baton back to Mohammed in case there are any questions or follow-up from this session today. Mohammed, how are you doing?
Doing good, alhamdulillah. Thank you, Dr. Gareth. I want to express my gratitude for delivering such an incredible presentation. Your insights have been enlightening, and I'm confident that our participants have gained valuable knowledge as well. We are now inviting questions from the audience. If you have any questions for Dr. Gareth, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section or raise your hand, and we will unmute you so that you can ask your question.
And let's also note that people are asking for the slides. Of course, we can send the slides to the Michelle and to yourself, and everyone gets access to a recording as well, don't they? So yeah, that's hopefully will be useful in future.
So we have a question from Roshan. How to formulate a good research question?
Wow, that's a great question, Roshan. Thank you for that question. It's very difficult to get into this effectively, especially as a young researcher. Formulating a research question is something that you often do with your supervisor and you do with more experienced researchers working in your field, because a good research question has to be a question that's relevant and interesting and important within a particular field. So in order to know if that question is important and interesting, you have to have a little bit of experience in that particular research field. And we call this a knowledge gap or a research gap. And these are often identified not just from experience, but also from literature work. So that's the main reason why when you start a research project or a PhD program, often a master's program, often you'll be doing a literature survey, a literature review. And the function of that is not just to get you into the literature on a particular topic, but also to help you start to understand where those important research questions, those knowledge gaps are. But yeah, it's a great question, Roshan, because it comes with experience, and lots of energy and time and money gets wasted every year, of course, especially in clinical research, going down those blind alleys, performing experiments that don't work, creating and generating negative results. So yeah, fantastic question. I don't have like a genie in the bottle kind of answer for that, but yeah, I hope my response is helpful, and do stay in touch if we can help you with any more questions about your research in future. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions of my own. Okay, so are there any specific tools or resources such as softwares, website that you recommend for improving research writing skills?
Improving research writing skills, did you say? Yeah, there are many, many, many. And we're living in a fantastic time for researchers these days, especially non-native speakers, because you really don't need to do all that much. You can put a lot of the information that you have in your head about your research topic and about your experimental work into a range of AI tools, and that will turn your thoughts and spoken English, even your notes, into written content that can be used for study. So yes, there are lots of tools. I have a big list. I'll share them with you at the end of this event. It depends on your subject area, depends on what kind of thing you need to do. But I mean, just basically, there are many tools for searching literature, identifying research gaps, formatting papers, even helping you to write papers, getting papers structured for submission to journals. But be careful. You will need to declare, or you should declare, the use of these tools to your target journal when it comes time to submit. So make a list of what you've used, keep that in mind, and definitely if you start to especially use AI tools to help you with the writing process, you're going to need to be able to tell the journal about that when you make your submission. But great, and I see that Hivaz is also asking a similar question. How do I see the role of AI tools in research? Ever increasing and ever expanding to make life easier, more effective for researchers around the world. But we do have to be open and transparent about our use of these tools, because otherwise that creates problems, big problems in the published record in the future, right? So that is really important. If you start putting information into the published literature that's been generated by AI, or articles that have been written using AI, and you're not declaring that, I hope that you can see that in the future would create issues for our understanding of the research base when we look back. So great questions. Thank you so much for your questions. Wonderful stuff.
Okay, we have Abdul Fattah raising his hand, so I'm allowing you to speak. So you are allowed to talk, Abdul Fattah.
Is this the question? As a non-native speaker, how can I decrease my spelling mistakes?
Okay,
Acquiring
he is
new
asking
vocabulary?
about, as a non-native speaker, how can
Yeah.
I decrease my spelling mistakes acquiring new vocabularies?
Well, very easily. That's a great question, and it relates to what we were just talking about. I mean, you can really just speak into a range of packages, and I do this as well, by the way. Just record your thoughts, record your information, and then use AI tools, even as simple as Google Documents and things like that, to turn your spoken word, your spoken thoughts into written text. And then, of course, you can use a range of AI editing tools, AI thesaurus tools to increase your level of vocabulary. So again, it's important to use these tools in an intelligent way so that you're not just speeding up the time it takes. And we see this a lot with researchers, making text using ChatGPT, sending it to journals without really understanding the text. And you'll all have seen these examples of, papers that have actually been published, still including like ChatGPT prompts and things like that at the beginning and end of different sections. So by all means, use these tools. And I think it's fantastic to, as a way of increasing your vocab base, of course, you're going to need to do some background reading and studying. When you see new words, just figure out what they mean, like use a thesaurus, use a list of synonyms, a spell checker to add them to your kind of mental vocabulary. That's a great, intelligent way to use AI tools. And, Prince is asking as well, like, is it wrong to use them for paraphrasing? Not at all. No, they're a great way of paraphrasing. But if you take text from one of Mohammed's papers, for example, and you paraphrase it using ChatGPT, you've got to cite the original source. Where you're straying into unethical and potentially problematic territory for yourself, if you get caught, is taking text from somebody else's paper, paraphrasing it with an AI tool or with your own work, with your own paraphrasing, but not citing the original. So you do need to always cite the original. So not at all. You can totally use these tools for paraphrasing, but you must cite the original. And excuse me, and also declare your use of the tools as well. Sorry, Mohammed. Sorry.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Does the use of AI come under plagiarism as far as writing is concerned?
It can do. In an example like the one we've just discussed, it totally can do. If you're taking text from somebody else's published work or off a website, and paraphrasing that text using an AI tool. So if you are cutting and pasting text from Mohammed's paper and then telling ChatGPT to paraphrase that text, make it simpler, make it easier to understand, shorten the word count from 500 words to 200 words, you will be plagiarizing if you do not cite the source. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Better to always cite your sources just to be on the safe side in academic writing.
Okay, we have another question from Sultan. Can I connect to scientists to participate with them in scientific research, and how, even if I didn't start my graduate studies yet?
That's a great question, Sultan, and absolutely you can. And I'm sure that many people would be delighted to hear from you. The IVPN Student Network is one of the best ways to do that because you're already inside of a very supportive, very mentoring environment with lots of researchers working in your subject area. So that's how you get started in research, by connecting with, by being mentored by more experienced researchers. So absolutely use your network, use the IVPN network, use your LinkedIn network, reach out to researchers whose papers you're reading and papers that you like, research areas that you would like to get into, and invite, write to them and ask if you can get involved. That's how it all begins. That's how collaborations start. That's a great question. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have another question from Hifaz. Please share your insights on having a supportive supervisor for getting our work recognized.
Yeah, this is another really good question. Thank you for this question. Of course, it's really, really important, not just at early career stages, but also later in your career, to have an effective and supportive mentorship group. And a supervisor is usually the first mentor relationship that you would have in your career. And of course, it's hugely important to have a supportive supervisor that helps you, that advises you, that promotes your work. I understand that many people do not end up in that situation, but again, that's why being part of a bigger network like IVPN is so important and so fantastic, because even if you are not getting the support that you need from your supervisor, I am 100% sure that you'll be able to find some other people within the IVPN network who will be able to help you with your research, promoting your research, finding the right journals, and indeed getting your work to the point that you will be able to get your PhD, get your work published, and move on to the next career stage. Thank you for all these great questions. Fantastic stuff. Thank you.
Okay, enough with the questions. We have wonderful comments. For example, love the energy, sir. It's a really great session. Great doctor, great session.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I
so
can
much.
relate to that. Yeah. Okay. I believe we have covered all the questions for now. Once more, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Gareth for the insightful presentation. Additionally, I'd like to express our thanks to everyone who joined us today. Your presence is sincerely appreciated, and we hope you found the presentation to be highly informative. Thank you.